even when there was something quite big going on. I mean, I remember going through several wars back in the 80s, right through to the last recession. And you see it, you'd observe it, and you'd sort of process it and discuss it. And then there'd be a reaction. Whereas now, even for the older generation, because it's in our faces all the time, it's on our phone, it's on social media, what I'm seeing is a different reaction now. It's a panic style of reaction. Hello, this is Dr. Rowe, and you're listening to the Growth Tribes podcast with Dr. Rowe and Harms. This is the podcast where two completely different generations tackle the most challenging topics that people are facing today. Above all else, the main reason that we chose to develop and record these podcasts is because we both have a passion for helping people go through life transformation, for improving their lives, for taking their lives to a completely different level. And it's our hope, our genuine, sincere hope, that by the end of each of these episodes, you'll have gained at least one insight that you can take away and apply directly into your own life. Practical tools, voices that come in from both generations, the younger generation with tips and tools, and the older generation with a sense of wisdom and experience, so that you can help unlock your true potential, to give the opportunity to make changes both on a personal, professional, financial and relationship level, and to give you a chance to impact both your lives and the lives of other people around you. So we welcome you. Welcome to the Growth Tribes podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Growth Tribes podcast. It's Harms here, and we've got a bit of a special episode today because, as we know, right now in the world, COVID-19, this virus which is spreading globally, is creating confusion, is creating fear, it's creating a level of what do I do? What do we do as a group of people, as well as an individual, as well as a family? So I've got Ro with me as always, and we want to explore. Ro, what's your thoughts on what's happening now, and what do we want to leave the listeners with after this episode?
Thanks, Harms. First of all, a message, I guess, from both of us all. Appreciate that these are troubled times for a lot of people. And I think for us, first of all, we want to just send our love and our warmth and consideration out to all your families. And if you are if you're experiencing a member of your family that has got the disease, the virus, and is struggling, we hope that you take something from this particular episode. And at the same time, it might be that there's some insights, some wisdom, and something that comes from this that you can share, not just on a personal level with your own family, but people around you, and maybe encourage them to have a listen to this, particularly if there's a lot of stress and confusion going on. Sometimes it's nice just to have a different perspective and a different voice. And what I thought today would be useful, Harms, bearing in mind the years I've been in different circumstances with people, through recessions, through even families going through their own meltdowns and changes and illnesses, but also economic challenges as well, to try and bring a bit of a structure to how maybe people could spend the next 2 to 3 months looking at their lives and reflecting, but at the same time managing the current situation and learning. I guess the simple way to look at this is think of it as two worlds. There's the world that you're currently living in terms of your global experience of the world, what's happening in the news, the media, outside of your family. And then there's the world that is your family, the day-to-day existence, the living, the survival, whatever you want to call it, over these coming weeks ahead. So if you had a piece of paper and you're drawing this up, I would actually say draw one circle with you in the middle and your family in that circle. That's that protective place that you've got to create. And then outside of that, there's what's happening in the world. And there's this integrative zone that exists right on the boundary of your family, and where your family now interacts with the world around you. And it's that spillover, which on a day-to-day basis, it's just a grey line. It's a blur. It's almost a boundaryless situation, because we do, on a day-to-day basis, live in and out of the world that's outside us. But unfortunately now we're put into a situation where that boundary is becoming very clearly defined. And I think for a lot of people, that boundary, they've never had to manage that. And it's the crossover between the two. So I think that's quite a good way to walk into this podcast. Does that make sense, Harminder?
That makes sense. And in terms of boundaries, I guess my generation, for those who weren't maybe in the recession and the financial crisis in 2008, this is the first time my generation are seeing anything like this. So I guess what we can do, Ro, is if there's a way to wrap this up at the end of it, it would be hopefully they are left with the listeners, amazing listeners at home, are left with a steadying voice to help guide them through the course of what's happening at the moment. And like you said, insights. And again, these will be our opinions, but these are opinions that have been formed from, Rohan working with many people over many years and applying those learnings to what's happening here on a global scale. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, you do a lot of work with younger people now, as well as the people you work with on the seminars that we go to who are older. So I think it's quite nice to have the two voices coming in. Normally we have an action plan, which I don't think is necessarily appropriate to today's podcast. But actually, in the conversation that we're having, I'm hoping there are certain things, actions and philosophies and thoughts and maybe things that you can take away from this. Say, well, let me implement this straight away, particularly those of you in the UK right now, as we go into a lockdown. I think it's going to happen in the next 48 hours from when we're recording this. And for those of you in other countries, you may be in that situation right now. So I think let's just jump in, Harms. In fact, I don't think I want to have a finish. I'd just rather, if it's okay, we work through these different elements and finish with maybe a rounded final message to encourage people to stay positive.
Okay, I love that. So let's start with a simple question on if somebody is maybe living under a rock and they're not actually aware of what's happening at the moment. In terms of an emotional level, what is happening out there in the world right now, from your opinion, Ro?
Yeah. Look, I mean, if we take this all the way back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if you've ever listened to me talk about this or happened to be in the Growth Tribes environment with us inside the community, this subject that comes up quite often, and we ran it at our last gathering, these 6 basic needs that every human being has. One of them, of course, is survival. And when your survival is threatened, pandemonium in your world, because the highest level of the 6 levels of need or hierarchy of need is the ability as a human being to want to desire to be able to give and contribute to other people. But when your world is been threatened, when your life has been threatened, when your finances have been threatened, your health has been threatened, your family's been threatened, it's very hard for a person to, in that moment, think of other people and to be able to focus on contributing at a greater level to the world, which is why if you look at Maslow's pyramid, those needs are at the top as opposed to the bottom, which is our survival needs. That's what's being threatened right now as we speak. So, I mean, I'll work through.
So I guess what we're saying, Ro, is it's almost like if you look at that pyramid and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because of what's being fueled and in terms of messages and the feeling people are having, those entire top layers are wiped off. And now we are all almost back in a mental state of we're in survival mode. And we're seeing people's behavior as if they are in that survival mode. And what emotions are those then triggering out there?
So I guess the first one, I mean, there's so many. Some people react in different ways, anger, etc., elation, confusion, completely just indifference. I think the first one to tackle is confusion. There is so much information coming at us from different places. Social media is rife with facts, but also fiction and hypotheses and conspiracy theories. And depending on your nature, your level of development, emotional development, your personal growth, how you react to that will be different. So, yesterday I overheard a conversation in a shop where one lady says, literally in a panic state, I didn't think she was going to get out of her door tonight, as in last night, and she just literally bags and bags of food, whereas the gentleman she was speaking to was saying, well, okay, so what they're suggesting is this, and he was going through a more logical approach, and he said to her, in reality, it's likely that you'll still be able to get out and to get your essentials. And she goes, oh, no. My son's told me we will be locked down, meaning that the houses will be locked. They'll probably be patrolling the streets and we can't even go outside of our house. So there's completely different extremes. And added to that are the public announcements. I think the government announcements, personally, this is my view in the United Kingdom, have been left wanting for more clarity. So another example was today, I was at a shopping counter, stood behind an elderly lady, and she's saying, I'm coming here now because I know I'm not going to be able to get back out because we're told as elderly people we're not allowed to go out the house. And the lady said to her, well, that's not exactly what I believe they're saying. I think what they're saying is, it's best to stay in the house, but if you need essentials, we're opening up 1 hour earlier for you. We're opening up at 8 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock. The general public can't come in, but you're allowed to come in earlier and get your food and go back to your home. So there's a little bit of safety for you. And then the other lady was saying, oh, no, but I thought we're not allowed out of our houses. And the lady said, I don't think That's what they're saying. Now, this is a major issue. My mum's 76, 77 years of age, and even she's confused. So we've also got the schools. We've chosen to take our daughters out of the school, and they haven't gone in all week. Our school is actually closing down tomorrow anyway. Some people said to us, "Oh, is that because? Oh, do we have to take them out?" And we said, "No. My fiance is Danish, and she's been following the philosophy from Denmark, and we've made a decision between the two of us. We're just going to keep them back, and they can study from home this week because the feeling is it's going to go that way anyway." So the confusion isn't just at a home level; it's in this outside world level as well, and of course that's spilling into the home, creating stress in the families, husbands and wives confused about what's going on. It's quite worrying to see the extent of that confusion. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's certainly what I'm seeing at the moment. It's a massive level of confusion, and that's spreading across all age groups, by the way.
It is. And when you then attach, like you mentioned, social media to that, it's like having all of those feelings on steroids, because you increase the confusion by 10x. You increase the lack of control, the anger, the fear, all those emotions that you just described there are literally 10x'd because of the amount of information being published. And it's almost minute to minute. If you take the big media news outlets, they're all producing an article. Now, everybody's article is going to be slightly different. It's going to be written slightly different. They're going to attach their own opinion to what statement's been made. They're going to attach their own, what does this mean? Okay, so the PM said this, so what does that mean? And they're going to attach their own opinion to that or confused message to that. Now, if I follow one news outlet and somebody else is following another news outlet, that just amplifies the confusion. So I think with social media, if not used appropriately, or if these companies are not using it appropriately, or if we do not absorb that information sensibly, then certainly this is what happens. So, well, we've described these now emotions. So I really want to get as quickly as possible into not quite action points, but the discussions of what we believe people can focus on. And so based on all these emotions, what are you observing out there? Like on a practical level, what have you seen? Because I know you've been out and about doing bits and pieces. What have you actually seen, observing? And you've just recently been presenting to an audience as well.
Well, okay, so this is a great question. Just before we go on to that, actually, I want to swing it back to you in just a moment to get your considerations on what do you think the younger generation's doing at the moment. So going back to what's happening, I think the other thing as well is that people are feeling a sense of lack of control. So this is going to lead to what I'm observing in a moment. But so lack of control, meaning, how am I going to be able to earn my money? Who's going to look after the kids? This is a conversation I'm hearing a lot at the moment from parents that are coming into the shops near us. I've got obviously other parents, oh gosh, I've got to do homeschooling. Fortunately, they're not having to go into work, so they can be at home. But there's suddenly this reactive behavior. So typically confusion, go back to what's happening. Confusion leads to reactive behavior, meaning instead of people proactively saying, right, let's plan, they're just running to supermarkets, grabbing stuff off the shelves and buying mass amounts of food just in the event that they don't quite know what's happening. So confusion leads to lack of clarity, leads to lack of control. Then you've got fear directly linked to anger. So some people go into a place of fear, others get into a place of anger. Why didn't we get told this earlier? Why didn't they react to this differently? And there's these two levels of consciousness. One being, you go into a shop and I see somebody who, for example, is taking a moderate amount of food or toilet roll off the shelves. Somebody else just literally wiping their arm across the shelves and just gathering it into a bag, just chucking it into a bag and then just bolting. Shop, literally truckloads of food coming out the store. So this whole thing that's happening, I think, is very much down to people's level of consciousness. And I don't want to categorize people because I don't think it's fair to say it. But if you think of it from a human level of consciousness, there are people in the world that are more conscious and maybe guided on a principle of a more even approach to it and trying to be more abundant in their thinking. And then there's another level of consciousness which vibrationally is lower, which is fear driven, lack driven, and sod you, I'm just going to get what I can and run and stockpile it and just live off that in the hope.
Yeah, the word equanimous, feeling at equilibrium, not reacting too extremely on either side. So not worrying too much, not fearing too much, but also then not acting in a way like you just explained there, which is stockpiling and this kind of behavior that's been driven from, I imagine, from the fear, the lack of control. Okay, I don't have control of my weekly shop now, so I better just stockpile because I don't know what's going to happen, without the consciousness to think about somebody else, other categories of the population, and also that feeling of just being equanimous and saying, actually, if we carry on and behave as we normally would, then there'll be enough stuff on the shelves for everybody, that kind of behavior.
Yeah, no, I agree. And this kind of leads into your other question, which was like, what are we observing? I'd be interested to see if you're seeing the same thing from the younger generation. My generation have a slightly different approach to it. So if you're 50, 55, 60, late 40s, mid 40s, we didn't grow up necessarily with social media. So we would traditionally lean on the news, on the radio, TV, newspapers. And there was always this reading of it, even when there was something quite big going on. I mean, I remember going through several wars back in the 80s, right through to the last recession. And you see it, you'd observe it, and you'd sort of process it and discuss it. And then there'd be a reaction. Whereas now, even for the older generation, because it's in our faces all the time, it's on our phone, it's on social media, what I'm seeing is a different reaction now. It's a panic style of reaction. And even for the older generations, that little bit of shit, instead of proactively pausing and thinking, okay, what's the best plan of action for us as a family? Where are we financially? Where are we physically, emotionally, health-wise, food-wise? It's like, shit, everyone else is doing this. I need to do that too. That's what I'm personally seeing, but I'm noticing a difference between communities. And I'll share this before I come back to my question to you. So I went to one town today, which you know fairly well because you live close to it, and it's more of a general population of people. And I went in, it's the nearest large supermarket to us, and I popped in early to get a few things that I knew that we were missing, including, for example, some extra toilet roll, things like that. And what I saw was, for example, I was in a queue as I went in, and then I kind of bypassed the queue because everyone was queuing for something specific. And I went round and I started to go down the aisles, and I got to one aisle where there was tissues and things like that. And this woman, I was stood there, and I think there was like 5 sets of boxes of tissues there. This woman looked behind me, and she saw that I was standing there looking to go, and we literally arrived at the same time. And I just slowed down to let her go first. She was probably late 30s. And she looked round at me out the corner of her shoulder, and she literally took her bag and she went, 1, there's 5, bear in mind, 5 boxes of tissues.
No way.
1, 2, 3, 4. She went for the 5th, paused, looked round at me, and then put it into her bag and literally just walked down the aisle really quickly. I looked at it, and there's nobody else behind me. And I just thought, fuck it, well, I'm just going to take this one box. And I put this one box of tissues in my bag. And I just thought that epitomizes this sense of fear, this sense of lack, this kind of desperation point.
Scarcity.
Yeah, scarcity. Interestingly enough, there's another row where there was wet wipes, wet wipes to sort of wipe your hands and things like that. And there was a gentleman there who was, I don't know, 23, 24, 25 years of age, stood there, and there was a small bunch of these wet wipes left, 3 or 4 boxes left on the counter. And there's this 2 really nice elderly couple there with one of them had a Zimmer frame, one of these metal frames, and then the other one was a gentleman with a stick. And they must have been, I don't know, late 60s, early 70s, obviously come out of their house. They hadn't realized the store opens early, so they just arrived, I guess, with a mass of people. I was at about 9:15, and this young guy was there, and literally this wet wipes, and I was behind them as I was coming round them, and I could hear them saying, I really think we should get some of those. We don't have any antibacterial stuff. And, he was talking about how she'd spilt food the night before, and I think we need to just use those to wipe your hands. And she said, oh, good idea. There's enough there. Like there's 3 or 4 there. And this guy literally just went, boom. And he knew they were there. He did the same thing. He bagged everything except for one, and then he walked off. And I just thought, oh man, there was no consideration whatsoever. And it's not for me to be judgmental, but it's more about observing people's level of consciousness. So that was 2 different age groups. So one was in his 20s, the other lady was probably late 30s, but it's the same behavior. And I guess in the back of my mind, Harms, and this is another question we can come to, is if you're there with your kids and you did that, knowing that there's people behind you, because kids are more considerate, they walk away, oh, mummy, what about that old lady that was behind us? Mum's like, no, we just got to take what we can and run. What are we teaching our kids? Because if we're teaching our kids to be driven by fear, lack, just look after yourself, don't worry about anybody else, that is, for me, one of the worrying things that I'm seeing emerge. And we watch this in disaster movies. When we watch these disaster movies, you see that behavior, but you're observing it as somebody sitting in your armchair going, look at how they're behaving. I would never do that. We
I
see people.
would never do that.
That's the whole thing about I would never do that. But when you get into the reality of it, that's when the differentiation between those that genuinely would do it and those that just say, fuck it, I'm doing it. I'm doing it anyway. Now, I don't know the circumstances of the people that took these things, so I can't make a judgment. But at the same time, I'm thinking there's an elderly couple here, clearly not able to physically even get there, but they managed to get there. And they're talking openly about what they need. Had he said, look, there's 4 here. I need a couple for myself. Would you like to let me put them in your bag? None of that. It was just like smash and grab and go.
Yeah.
That's what
And what I love is the interesting point you made about children, because this is a time where most of us have not genuinely lived through. There was a natural age group that lived through the war, but now as an age group, especially my age group, we've not physically lived through this. So we have this level of fear, and we're observing this level of fear and that kind of behavior in shopping centers. But if you have a child with you, this is their time to shape how to behave when there is a extreme circumstance like this. So when the child, imagine, grows up and it's their turn to act in a similar way, which way will they act in? And, if you're just looking at it from a bird's eye view, you're going to believe that they're going to act in the way that, let me take 4 and leave 1, or let me take 5 and leave nothing for the next person. Would you agree with that in terms of modeling for children?
Yeah, kids do model, and that's the challenge we've got now. You're spot on. I had a long conversation with my mum, and she was talking about when they went through the war and, when everything was rationed. So she's just naturally always been like that. If you went to my mum's house, you'd laugh because she has a stockpile of stuff, and so when there's some sort of sale on, she will just naturally buy. And she's 70, so she's always been like that right from the early days. She's always seemed to have bought a little bit more than she needs. She sits on it and then stockpiles it. If there's a bit of a tough period, she just eats off it, uses it. So when we talked about loo roll, she was laughing because she's got probably like 2 months of loo roll there. She's got tinned food. Tinned food back in my mum's day was like, oh my gosh, we got a tin of Spam. We're going to make it last for a week. So it's a philosophy of an older generation, older than my generation. Whereas today, everything's about instant. So people are buying now and not thinking about protecting other people around them. And it does worry me. And in the sense that it worries me what we're teaching our kids, because this is a significant emotional event. And if you work with anybody in the world of psychology, a significant emotional event is something that happens bang, and it can be positive or negative, and it can leave a scar or it can leave a healing feeling. And at the moment, I think we're in that place of scar. So even the conversations on live I just did recently, it's like, how do we talk about this around our kids in the right way so we don't leave that scar? But it's also how we behave. Now, fortunately, there were no kids in that scene that I saw, but I'm damn sure if it had been a different time of the day, in the evening, after kids are back out or weekend and the kids have been there and the parent would have acted like that, that's now left the kids with a belief system that, hey, if there's a little bit on the shelf and there's somebody else that needs it, it's okay to just take it and run, because that becomes their behavior. And no doubt the person that did that to the elderly couple probably modeled that from somewhere else. Maybe their parents, I don't know. Contrast. So I then went back to a village near us, which you know well because we've met there before. I'm not going to name the village. I don't think it's appropriate to do so unless you say name it. But basically, it was a community there where there's a lot of people who are holistic healers. There's 3 organic farms, as you know. There's about 3 or 4 organic shops, lots of natural homeopaths. And the community there is very much a community. There's a lot of farming goes on. People are, for want of a better word, and I think it's the right word, are more emotionally developed, meaning there's a much higher level of consciousness. They don't get fazed by a lot of the media hype that goes on. And in fact, there's not a big culture around digital devices, etc. So I drive back through the village, which is close to where we live. It's about half a mile away. In fact, one of the organic places right opposite us. And so I go into this shop and I'm thinking, okay, well, let me see if there's any toilet roll or any kitchen roll there, because I just want to grab one pack. I walk upstairs and literally on the shelf, I was thinking this is incredibly synchronistic. There's 2 large, these jumbo packs of kitchen roll there. And I looked at it and there's a lady just in front of me as I walk up. And by the way, this shop, there's food on the shelves. This shop, there's bread on the shelves. This shop, there's lots of different things like green vegetables and tinned food, but it's all organic, etc. I just come away from a major supermarket, empty shelves. I go here and there is stuff there. Don't get me wrong. There is stuff that's a lot less than before and some of it is empty, but I would say 75% has been depleted, but not stripped bare. And I walk up and there's two of these jumbo rolls of kitchen roll there. And this lady looked round and she said, "Oh, are you after one of these?" And I said, "If possible." And she goes, "Oh, I'll take one and you take one." And there was no rush, no desperation. She actually handed it to me. She took it. And as I went down to the queue, there was another 3 other people, all with one of those rolls each. I was going to take a picture of it. I was actually going to post it on social media. If I could done the two contrasts, completely different level. And these are people with kids. There's younger people there. I saw an elderly lady in there, and this man was helping her. Literally, he'd gone in with one of his kids who's very young, like a baby, just in one of these straps. And he's there, and this lady was trying to reach up to get, I think it was some vegetables and things. And he said, "What are you after?" And she said, "Some kale." So he pulled down the kale. And then she said, "I also need, is it possible to help me with some butter?" And he took across and got some butter before even looking after himself completely. And that's the difference between this level of consciousness and saying, okay, we got to look after everybody. Obviously, so you got two contrasts. You got a guy there with a child helping a lady who's probably 65, 70 years of age. And that's the contrast I saw today. Two totally different types of behavior.
It's fantastic. And I think it's important not to mention the name, because if you're listening at home or you want to share this podcast message with other people who you feel need this message, then for them, it's like, actually, we don't want to tag a location, a type of culture, a type of person to this event, because actually this should be the behavior, period. And that's why I think it's important not to name in this scenario, because then it's very easy for people to say, oh, well, it's okay for that place, or it's okay for those kind of people, and that kind of culture, whatever. I don't want somebody to tag an association with them and say it's okay for them, because actually it's not. The scenarios are the same. We're all the same people, essentially. We're just behaving in different ways.
And actually, somebody might go, "Where's the town? Oh, it sounds like they've got some loo roll. Let me just leg it down there."
Yeah, exactly. And then strip that shop.
But no, I think you're right. And ultimately, it comes down to a human behavior. And I think that's one of the messages I want to get across today is starting to reflect differently on how we react to the situation that's around us.
So I think from my perspective, and it's interesting, and it's quite hard to pinpoint what it's like for my generation at this time. I think there'll be a few theories flying around. But I think one of the challenges, in addition to panic, because no doubt there's panic amongst my generation, because number one, we haven't been through it again. But I think the other thing I want to add to your topic and be interested to hear your thoughts is my generation generally has a bit of a mistrust with the system, a mistrust with hierarchy of power. So my biggest worry is that my generations are going to get instructions, and we're just not going to listen to those instructions, i.e. don't clear the shopping malls or shopping centres, i.e. stay self-isolated, or whatever the instruction is from the government or from the highest authority of our nation. We're just not going to listen. We're just going to be blasé about it, because I don't know what it is, but we just don't trust experts. We dismiss experts, especially in the realm of politicians, and we've got a bit of a distrust for them. So I think that's my biggest worry, that there are going to be some instructions, but they're going to be communicated. So these are going to come from medical experts, but they're going to be communicated via political channels. And my generation are going to say, well, we don't trust this party, we don't trust this politician, so they don't know what they're talking about. We're going to carry on as normal. And I'm starting to see some of that float around on social media, which is my worry for my generation.
So what do you think that's leading to? What sort of behavior do you believe that's going to lead to? Because I'm inclined to agree with you. And I see it, I guess, through a lot of the personal development and the wealth seminars that we run, because there is genuinely this anger, frustration and kickback against the system. But in this situation, what do you think it's going to lead to for millennials, for younger generation?
So it can either go one or two ways, because it's all about, in my personal opinion, it's going to be about reinforcing the behavior. So if there's a group of millennials and the news spreads that, hey, we were totally fine during this time and we did exactly what we wanted, the next time something like this happens, which it will, we're just going to just do what we want. And that's going to cause a problem for the greater population. So that's the whole challenge with following an expert's advice in times like this, where we all have to stick together ultimately. And I think that level of mistrust is just going to cause a rebellious behavior, where we just say, I don't really care what I've been told to do. I'm just going to do what I want to do anyway. So as an example, simple example might be self-isolation. Not interested. I'm just going to go head out and carry on my life as normal and not listen to the advice. That's the worry.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I think I mean, for the younger ones listening, it's a tough time for you. I would say start taking a slightly different approach to how you look at the world, in the sense of ask yourself a deeper question. Who around me can I contribute towards? Who can I help? Within the community that I'm in at the moment, are there people I can bring that youth, that dynamic energy to? My insights, my wisdom, my thoughts, my feelings, my passion. And how can I bring that in and help the small or the larger community around me? So it's not so much about just self-focus, which I think all of us have to be mindful of, even myself with my kids. But is there something just a little bit more emotionally elevated that I could do? And it could be your own family. It could be reaching out to people that you've lost touch with, even close family members that you might be distancing from. But equally, if you're living in an area where you know there's elderly people, just that little bit more focus on helping somebody else often shifts your rebellious. That's what I found with, if you stop somebody, one of the easiest ways to stop people rebelling so much is to give them something more contributory to do, because the rebellion is more about, hey, you're challenging me, you're challenging my beliefs, you're challenging my passion, my youth. Whereas if you then shift that focus towards contributing to somebody beyond yourself, it becomes less about you and it becomes more about others. I know it sounds a little bit like, oh yeah, but everyone's in a tough place right now. But even if it's just one gesture towards a neighbor, it just, especially elderly people, because it might give the younger people a slightly different sense of perspective on where those people have been. And maybe you take some learnings from it. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. I wasn't going to say that in this podcast, but that's my thoughts on it.
I love that, because, when we started the podcast, we said right now, the large, and this is not saying there's not people within every category we're speaking about who's doing amazing things, because they are. But it's a case of saying, we started talking about we're currently in a area of security driven survival mode, whereas doing what you just said there, Ro, starts to tap into those, Maslow hierarchy of needs, the higher part of the triangle, the self-worth, the part where we're giving and receiving that, that boost of, oh my God, that was an amazing experience because I gave. So I think working through that, we can then tap into it outside of our work, that feeling of doing something of value outside of our workplace, outside of our business place, because we're doing it through the community. So I think that's great. So at this time, Ro, do you think it's a good time now? Let's leave the listeners with, and it's going to be hopefully the longer part of the episode, which is a structure which we can leave them with, so they can tap into and say, actually, let me just select that. Let me add that to what's happening right now. Because right now, the biggest challenge is that we are going to be in lockdown. We are going to have to self-isolate. That news is coming already. So we are going to be spending time in an uncomfortable position, or potentially doing stuff that we haven't done before. So I was thinking of breaking this down. You've got something which you put out into social media quite often, which is these 5-a-day recipes, these areas to focus on to become successful. And I was thinking, if we just pull that apart and use those 5 areas, and maybe we talk about 1 or 2 things, or maybe one thing each within each category that somebody can do specifically related to COVID-19, self-isolation, this period of lockdown that we believe we're going to be going into. So would that work? And if yes, can you just let the listeners know what are those 5 things?
That's a great idea. So the concept of 5 a day emerged a few years back, and it was kind of an amalgamation of lots of different things over the years that I've done in the different events and seminars and the Turning Point book. But what I found was people saying, oh yeah, so what sort of things can I do on a daily basis or a weekly basis? And you've heard of mind, body, soul. Well, for me, it was a bit broader than that. So the category was broken down into mind, body, self, relationships, and money. Mind being the conscious way that we show up, as opposed to the self, which is more internal. So mind, think of mind as the way you operate in the world when you are in the world and operating on a daily basis with time management, money management, communication. It's all those things that we consciously and practically do through our consciousness, through our mind. Body is about fueling your body the right way, feeding your body the right way, doing the right things to keep it healthy and vibrant. Self now is delving down into who you are, the core of who you are, your identity, your purpose, your values, your beliefs. So it's working on that personal development side of you, as opposed to the mind, which is more conscious in the world. Relationships is everything from the relationship with you right through to the relationship with intimate family, friends, and people outside you in your sphere of influence and beyond. And then money is everything from how you manage your money right through to how you earn money, create money, deal with debt, but also create wealth as well. So there's the 5 categories, and they actually encapsulate everything that we do. You can literally, you think of a situation in your life, it'll fall into one of those 5 categories. So it's a great idea to bring that into this moment, Harms. And I think if we can maybe put some meat into these areas for now, in association with this current situation, I think that's a spot on idea. I love it.
Fantastic. And everything we're going to speak about going forward will be in the show notes at growthtribes.com/podcast. So if you're listening to this and you're taking a stroll, you're having a walk, or you're cooking in the kitchen and you don't have a notepad with you, not to worry, this will be in the show notes. So on that note, let's start with mind. Category number 1, mind. If you kick this one off, then I'll jump off the back of yours with any ideas I have.
So with mind, remember, this is about consciousness. So I think one of the areas that people are struggling with at the moment is the fact that they are in turmoil. So, I mean, a classic example was today, right? So we woke up and the kids are at home, and I've got a refurbishment going on our house at the moment. I've got my PA messaging me to say, oh, there's a bunch of mail. There might be some letters there that you need to have a look at. Of course, they're in the office, and I haven't got to the office. I got a message from one of the people that we owe some money to, who's a builder, that said, oh, I've sent an invoice through. Did you get it? Would it be possible to pay it before the end of the week? And there's a whole bunch of things going on. And you and I wanted to do a podcast, and we've got lockdown going on, so I've got to go do some shopping. Now, on a normal day, that time management is fairly clearly demarked for me. I've got this whole process of how I would do it. But now I've got to look at the Maslow's thing, right? So Maslow is like survival. I'm not waking up in the morning and going, right, what's the triangle? What do I do first? Do I do the letters for my PA? Do I do the gentleman that needs his invoice clearing by the end of the week? What do I do first? I think, okay, kids, from a time management perspective, I've got to look after the kids first, and the supermarkets are about to open. If I wait till about 12, probably going to be empty. Let me go there first. So for a lot of people, the management of time is really poor when they're in survival mode, because survival mode is like just panic and do everything. So there's 2 things to consider here. One is, if you broke the day down, what do you need to do first? What's most important? What's least important? And then organize your day accordingly. Because if we're going into lockdown, or if you're in lockdown at the moment, you're going to be at home. And for a lot of people, the day gets completely disbanded. It just dissipates. And I used to do a lot of work in probably about 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. I did some voluntary work on people that were unemployed and helping them create a mindset that got them back into employment. And I said, what's one of your biggest challenges? And they said, the minute we got unemployed, initially there was fear. There was panic. Then there was like, oh, I'm struggling to get a job. And then there became indifference, and then there became apathy. Now, I'm just going through that process because I remember it so often. And the apathy, I said, what do you mean by apathy? Well, TV, sitting at home, don't feel my sense of worth has been valued. I've worked all these years, nobody wants me. I feel frustrated. And being at home means I don't have to go do anything. So I switched to TV on. I said, okay, what happened next? I started watching these regular TV programs, soap operas and things like that. Now, of course, Netflix is around. It wasn't really so much around back in the early days, but now Netflix, Prime TV, you've got Sky, etc. And I found people literally would switch the TV on at 9 o'clock in the morning. And when I got to do a bit of coaching with them, I said, what you up to? Oh, yeah, I've just watched TV, doctor. I was like, okay, that has to stop, because it just consumes people. So I call it the unemployment rut, and it's when people got into a rut because they weren't being proactive. They weren't doing something with their time in a constructive way. They were just being fed. And that's the worry I've got for people that are going into the zone at the moment. Oh, great, I've got time off work. I know what I'll do. Let's just switch off and watch TV for a while. That's okay for a short dose, but it's bloody addictive, because it's feeding your needs. You don't have to do anything. It's, you're watching something that maybe is about the world that's worse than you. And it just feeds that need for wanting to have, time filled. So the first thing is manage your time wisely. Start to use it to learn. Maybe you allocate an hour of the day to learn, or 2 hours of the day to learn, an hour of the day to do exercise, etc. Spend time with your kids. And then, yes, have some switch off time, but don't make it a predominant focus. So time management, Harms, I think is a really important thing, because most people's time is managed for them because they are going into a work environment where they have to do certain things because that's what's required of them, as opposed to now they have to manage their time. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. And and you got an incredible series of that called time management in the Growth Tribes Vault. So I'll make sure to put that on the show notes as well. So this actually ties nicely into my point, which I want to talk about under the category of mind, which is you as a person, because we are constantly pulled and pushed by the day, and we normally have a massively full schedule. Every day is a full schedule, whether it's work, whether it's the kids, whether it's the downtime, the cooking, and all of the stuff that happens within the day. Especially if you're a business owner, there's no day is exactly the same. So now I think we have a natural opportunity, whether it was forced upon us or whether it has occurred naturally as a debate, is we now have a chance to be present with ourselves, take some time to lock off, to use the word appropriately, but no phones, have no access to the news for a while, no social media, no screens, and even no music, unless that helps you be present with yourself and simply just be. Because how often are we as a population in a process where, hey guys, spend 2 weeks at home, no work, or whether there's less work to do because everything interconnected is now slowing down. We now have that chance, and then I think observe, and this is something I took away from when I did my 10-day silent meditation retreat, Ro, is what kind of thoughts are going on in your head. Are they naturally positive? Are they naturally negative? Is there anybody you're thinking about during that time? Do you need to reach out to them and, like you said, connect with them? Is there, what I love naturally is when you're in that state of just being with your own mind, is do you find your thoughts take you into the past, or are you starting to worry about the future now? Are you recalling pleasant memories from the past, or are you thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks? What's going to happen in the month? And I think at this stage, without going too deep into it, just observe it. Spend that time with yourself without the distractions that are going on in your own home, and just take some time to be present with yourself. So I think that's a nice alternative to the craziness that happens out there. Whether it's meditation, whether it's mindfulness, it's up to you how you want to define it. But I think that's a nice, simple process to go through.
I agree. And actually that sort of leads into the other area. So remember, with mind, it's about what you're doing on an outward perspective. So it's what you're doing in the world. So we talked about time management. You're talking about being present there as well. Very important. The other thing is network, actually. So obviously, if we're experiencing lockdown, you're in your own home, you're with your family. I think a lot of people have been so pulled into this world of negativity that it creates frustration, and the communication that happens around people is quite negative. So if you're looking at your own network, think about who do you know that's in a positive place. Maybe you've got a WhatsApp group with really positive minded people. Maybe you're in a tribe like we have with Growth Tribes, where people, yes, they subscribe on a monthly basis, but they communicate, they get access to lots of positive information, and there's nothing really in that community that is negatively driven. Unlikely you're going to be able to go out and meet people, so it needs to be Skype calls, it needs to be supportive groups. But think about the network of people that are around you, and who could you talk to who is actually genuinely emotionally developed to a different level, and at the same time is not in a place of panic but in a place of proactivity. So I think that's another big thing to consider in this particular area, Harms.
Yeah, and I'm in a WhatsApp group with a unique set of property investors who are fantastic. The moment this instigated, we all asked ourselves the question, yes, we're affected, but how can we help those others in the community? And I think on a daily basis, and almost by an hourly basis, we are dropping solutions in there, and there's very little negativity. So the power of your network, whether it's virtual, whether it's online, is extremely, extremely important at this time. So on that note, well, let's move to, I think there's 3 fantastic points there within the mind section. Now let's move to the second part that you focus on, which is body. If you define body for us, then we can dive into that.
So with body, what we're talking about is really two things: what you do with your body and what you feed your body, and how we can nurture this amazing temple that we have. And it's been a passion of mine for many, many years, which is why for me it's important we include it in here. So don't just think of it as the physical exercise, the running, the walking, the going to the gym and doing the aerobics and the yoga and Pilates or whatever it is that you believe that the body is about. The body is also about how we nutritionally keep it safe, how we protect it. So what we drink and what we feed it with. And that's essentially what the body is. So do you want me to sort of throw a few suggestions in here, or do you want to jump in?
Well, I'll start because
okay, cool.
Well, you've been talking about the subject of body for years. In your seminars, you've had a health seminar as well, where you had people green juicing and all these phenomenal things. So this is not a new thing to you. Whereas let's assume that the listener hasn't necessarily been doing all of these things consistently, and many of our listeners do. But let's start from, maybe some simplistic, I think, solutions for people so it doesn't become so overwhelming. So I was going to start with the fact that I think just briefly research around the topic of the immune system and how to keep it up to scratch, I guess, is really the answer here, because this should ideally be happening on a regular basis, regardless of if there's a virus globally. It should just be a thing that we're always conscious of. So I think if you can talk into the space of the immune system, because that's currently a hot topic at the moment, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mindful of us giving advice here, and I know there's some sensitivity about this out in the public space at the moment. There's people saying X, Y, and Z, and that is certain things that are being said are literally being taken literally, and I think there's people selling products online that are making sorts of claims. So I'm mindful of that. But if we think of it, and I talked about this in the live just recently, think of the immune system as this brick wall between you and the outside world. If somebody's attacking you, then the brick wall is your immune system. And I know it's a simplistic way of looking at it, but actually if you look at it like that, every brick that you put into the wall, builds up the immune system. Everything that you do that knocks a brick off reduces the immune system. And there's a point where the enemy that's attacking you and your family, if the brick wall is low enough, they can get over that brick wall, stone wall, or whatever you want to call it. So that is essentially how our immune system works in a very, very, very simplistic manner. How do we build that brick wall? My personal belief is putting food and liquids into it that actually help it grow, so to build the immunity. So for example, there's pretty much a lot of evidential proof now to suggest that if you have sugar in the body, processed foods in the body, it lowers the immune system, it attacks the immune system. There's a thing called acidification of the blood, which is where if you have too much sugar, your blood acidifies to a point. In fact, I've seen my blood under microscope. I think you've done the same thing, actually.
Yeah, same here, yeah.
Blood microscopy or live blood analysis is called, where you can look at the quality of the blood and the cells in fact, if anybody wants to look this up online, you can actually look up live blood analysis on YouTube. There's videos of this, and you can see these lovely, round, healthy cells for somebody that's drinking good quality water, eating live food, staying off sugar, staying off alcohol, staying off processed food. So the blood is clean and clear. It's lovely to see. And you can see these circular round blood cells that are actually separated from each other, and they're flowing freely. However, if somebody eats, and by freely what I mean is they're delivering nutrients to the body, they are oxygenating the body, and the immune system saying, great, I feel good. And the exchange between the lymphatic system and the blood system is working, because the lymph system doesn't actually have its own pumping mechanism. You pump by movement, but the toxins build up in the lymph system and need to be excreted out through our urine and through our poo. So if you're actually not looking after the body, even the lymphatic system can build up, and that's why some people get these sort of sore spots around their lymph nodes. There's a lot of toxin building up and they're not moving, etc. We'll come to that in a moment. So what you can eat affects the whole system, the lymphatic system and the blood system. So if you look at blood cells that have had, there's actually probably examples of it online. I remember looking at this a few years ago, and we've seen it live in front of an audience. We've done these tests. Somebody eats something very sugary or processed and then goes for a live blood test. The blood actually changes, the cells change shape. You might have remembered this from your test, but they're not circular. If coupled to that, if they're dehydrated or drunk or eaten things that have caused the body to be dehydrated, suck that moisture out of the body, out of the cells, they stick together, and you see these globulation. Did you see this globulation of blood cells? And that's when you are not hydrated and when you're not oxygenated. And of course, if the blood cells stick together, they can't move freely, which means the immune system starts to lower because it can't get out and deliver what it needs to deliver. I'm trying to be simplistically scientific. Is this making sense?
That does make sense. And how I know that the general population, again, this is not targeted at you personally, the listener, but when we went to the shopping centre very recently, just for our normal weekly shop, there was plenty of fresh greens, fresh vegetables, and of course the other caveat is when do they stock the shelves, but I think it's quite an interesting observation. Fresh greens, fresh vegetables, lots of items with vitamin C and antioxidants in them were all freshly, readily available. Yes, slightly depleted, but available. The tins, the things with very little nutritional benefit to your immune system was all gone. Completely. The shelves were empty, but the veg was there. So, me and my wife were just intrigued because we had a full weekly shop with all the typical greens and immunity strengthening foods that were there, but everything else was gone. And that's quite an interesting observation in the sense that when we are fighting a virus, our priority should be to stock up on the greens, antioxidants, vitamin C, punching power, these foods that have incredible nutrition in them, versus all of this other stuff which people are buying on a stock basis, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I think I saw a guy with literally 2 big packs of Coke with his kids, and then when I walk past the water, the bottled water area, is like loads and loads still there. So obviously people are just, kids are going to be at home. What can I give them? I'll keep them happy. Give them, okay. When I'm going to say cola, I'm going to say soda. I'm not going to put a brand on this, but you know what I mean.
Fizzy drinks.
Soda. Yeah. So yeah. I mean, it was bottles of soda drinks and things like that. So here we are now. We've got an opportunity as a collective culture. Wherever you are, what if you spent the next couple of weeks looking into this? What if you just spent an evening looking at live blood analysis on YouTube to see what it looks like and see the impact between somebody eating processed sugary food and look what it does to their blood versus somebody that's actually hydrating properly and drink, and we'll come to that in a moment. So I think, that's the first thing is just starting to understand how the immune system works. So anything that we can do to eat that allows us, I mean, if you want to ask me what we do, that's fine. I'm not going to give advice, but you can say, well, what do you do, Ro? That's a different question. And if you want to do that in this section, I'm happy to do that, Harms.
I think let's leave that for listeners to follow you on Facebook and Instagram, where you share some of these thoughts anyway.
Okay, great.
I think that's a good time because actually in the last week leading up to, whilst all the news has been happening, you've been sharing some of these great messages saying, okay, this is the kind of stuff that we do. This is the way we'd send the message to children. These are the kind of things I eat. These are the kind of supplements I take. And you do it in a respective way where, sometimes it's not about the brand that you're talking about. It's more to do with why that's important, why this particular supplement's important. So I think let's leave that for the live, because, I'm conscious that people listening to this, I don't want to add that additional. I think the focus for them should be to research, to go and learn about this, go and
agreed.
Input the fact that how do I strengthen my immune system, this brick wall, how do I make it as strong as possible versus having fizzy drinks, which is one of the components that will tear that wall to pieces. So I think let's leave them with that.
Actually, whilst we're on it, can I do a bit of a plug for the Growth Tribes? Because in the Growth Tribes community, inside the vault there, if anyone's listening to this, actually a Growth Tribes member, there is actually a health series there. And that's
fantastic.
We've had some really good feedback on that series, and it's me actually going into a lot more in terms of the scientific side of it and just some of the things that I do on a habitual basis and have done for many years now. So if it's okay, maybe they could go and have a look at that instead.
That's fantastic. So I'll put that in. I'll tell you what I'll do is, because for most of these, actually, there's a really comprehensive video series. So for each section, if somebody's interested, they can go check out that video series.
Yeah.
Because a part of their self-isolation could be, right, number one, I want to learn how to manage my time. Now I've got a whole day free. Number two, I need to understand more about the health because actually I've just taken it for granted and I've just followed basic level information. Let me actually learn about this. So when something like this happens again, my family's immune system is strong and we have the confidence that we can fight whatever this is that's coming to attack us. So I think that's a great way to leave the body section, which leads us now nicely into the next section, which is self. Now, if you describe self again, we can then talk into that subject.
So self is different to mind, and a lot of people confuse the two. So remember, mind is how we're consciously being in the world, whereas self is the internal part of who we are. So if you want to simplify it, it's your core, so your identity. And your identity comes down to essentially your beliefs, your spirituality, who you are as a person on a spiritual level, also your value system and your sense of purpose in life as well. So it's much more meaningful, it's deeper, it's also dealing with fears and all of those different areas that exist on an internal level, whereas the mind is more about consciously how we exist and operate outside in the outside world. So there is a difference between the two. And inside here, this is the area I love to play. Because if we get this right, often it changes how we operate in the outside world, both with other people, with our relationships, how we manage our money, etc. So if you ask me which of these is the most important, I think singly this is without a doubt the most important.
Okay, great. So let me talk about, especially for my generation role, I'll start talking about it. And then if you jump in with any observations you have in yourself, because I imagine yours would be extremely powerful. As you're saying this, if you're listening at home, self, start to prioritize that. And I want to start with talking about, I guess it's my generation, because your generation may not have felt the same experience as such. Whereas my generation, I feel, are extremely comfortable. We have got almost used to or expectant that we have the ability to get things instantly, whether that's results, whether that's food takeaways, whether that's the ability to take a pill and have six-pack abs, whatever that is, we almost expect instant gratification for whatever we're doing. And I found that to break this pattern, we sometimes have to put ourselves in uncomfortable positions. So I've recently, Ro, you're aware, I lived in a small village up north where the nearest takeaway was quite a distance away. There was only one kind of takeaway that delivered to us. It was quite a drive to get to shopping centre. So I felt everything I'd got used to and comfortable with was suddenly broken. And after 2 months of being uncomfortable, I became comfortable with that uncomfort, if that makes sense. So what I encourage people to do is actively seek out being uncomfortable. So rather than stockpiling all of our creature comforts that we have in the world and that we're just used to having, let's try something different. Why don't we simplify our menu for the week? Why don't we, instead of wearing a different outfit every single day, simplify the kind of clothes we wear? And this, where I first learned about this, Ro, was a part of this whole Stoic philosophy study, which is really cool to go explore because they encourage you to actively go and do things that are out of the norm that you would typically be very comfortable with. So i.e. just actively get uncomfortable. So I think practicing that we're at an opportune time where we can practice that. So what I'm saying is rather than go and try to hoard and try to stay in the normality, we have to face a situation that this is not a normal situation. So we have to adapt. And by adapting, we almost have to simplify our life slightly. And I think that's going to be very tricky for my generation because if they switched off certain things like food deliveries, there's certain companies out there which for safety reasons, which is completely fair and accurate, are saying we're not currently servicing. Amazon, it's fair to use that name, they're large enough now, are saying we're only delivering essentials. Shopping centers that, you could guarantee a delivery stop next week are now overwhelmed. So now we're in a tricky situation for my generation that we are going to be uncomfortable. But I think the message I'm trying to say is embrace that so we break the pattern of this expectation. Does that make sense, Ro?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's a radical change in mindset. And I don't think it's about just an age thing as well. I think it's about it's a philosophy of bigger thinking beyond yourself. We're at a point of panic, confusion, and out of that comes clarity. And some people will stick their heads down and want to work harder. Others will stick their heads up and say, change of direction. And I think this is what it's about. It's about moving out of that whole philosophy, getting uncomfortable, learning to do that on a regular basis.
Absolutely. So what would you add to the self section?
I think on a personal level, I think this is a chance to review, which kind of leads in from what you've just been saying, actually. So it's time to review. If you're making notes, great thing to remember that it's time to review. And what I mean by that is what is the most important thing in your life right now? Not watching Netflix. It's not great. I've got a week off. Let's do sod all. Let's just chill out and relax like another holiday. Actually, what if you just took a completely different view on this? What if you said, right, from an emotionally developed perspective, now we breathe. I'm under a forced opportunity to have a holiday here. This is literally, I've been given a 2-week, 3-week break. Normally I'd be going out traveling. I even have to stay at home. Let me allocate in these next 7, 10, 12, 14 days, whatever it is, let me allocate a certain number of hours per day to totally disengage from all the noise that's out there and start to ask some serious questions about who am I? What do I stand for? What do I believe? What's my sense of purpose? What does this really mean for me as an individual looking ahead into the future? How's the landscape of my life going to look? If everything gets back to quote unquote normality, nothing's ever going to be the same, because now we're going to live from a different place of experience. I think there's going to be more fear around traveling to certain countries. I think there's going to be slightly different behavioral patterns in groups. Any slight signs of illnesses, etc., is going to make people nervous. And with that, it's going to come a change of how people do business, how they live. The sense of security around jobs has changed. And I'm trying to paint a picture here to say, stop, breathe, look at the landscape and say, how do you want your landscape to be in the future? And it's not that you can necessarily change the overall global landscape, but you can navigate through to a different, you might be heading towards a desert right now, but whilst we're at the top of the mountain, instead of coming off the mountain and going right down the passageway and through the rocks, which leads out to the Sahara, what if we go left, which goes out to the green meadows and the rivers and out to the estuary, going out to the ocean over that side? It's about re-navigating the future, and that starts with you. That was a bit intense.
But I think, that you said this was one of the most important parts of these 5 components, these 5 elements to us as a human being as such. So yeah, I think that was needed. Now, let's talk about a subject which I know you are extremely passionate about and you have a lot of fun with as well, which is relationship. So if you define for the listeners how this can link to what's happening in the current scenario, but relationships can truly, I believe, be enhanced during this time.
By the way, whilst we're on this, I'm glad you've picked this up, because it is a passion of mine. And because it's so passionate, what the result of that was over the last few years is that each of these areas we're talking about, there are actually video series on each of these inside our Growth Tribes vault. So if you're listening to this and you're a member, fantastic. You may not have looked through all these. You may have been focusing on one area previously. It could have been money, for example, or it could have been personal development. Remember, we've got 15 to 20 different video and audio series that are tucked in there, and each one covers different areas. So there's one on relationship. There's definitely one on self, which is about self-evaluation, values. There's another one on beliefs, another one on purpose. So fill your boots up. Go and have some fun and learn. It's a good opportunity to do that now. So that leads me to relationships.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, big subject. So remember, we're talking about mind, body, self, and last 2 before we wrap up is relationships and money. Relationships meaning the relationship with you as a person, relationship with your immediate family. So that's your children, your partner, husband, wife, whatever your relationship is. Parents, and then we go outside of that to family, and then we've got very close friends, and then we've got friends, and then we've got work colleagues, and the radius increases as you go further away from yourself. So it's learning to work on and be present in those relationships. So, for example, I'll pick one to start. There's a couple I had a thought of about for this particular section.
Yes, please.
If you're a parent listening to this, I know you're not harmed at the moment, but for those of you that are watching and listening, if you're a parent, I think this is a great time to start to educate your children in a way that will help them understand what's happening in the world. I talked about this in a recent post on Facebook Live. I think a lot of parents aren't quite sure how to explain this, or their kids are by default getting the information from social media through phones or through watching their parents on social media. They're hearing things outside of their world. Remember, there's inner world and the outer world. The outside world is just bringing that information to our kids. And I think there's a heaviness, a concern, a fear. Younger kids really don't know how to deal with it. My daughter was asking questions about, what if something happened to daddy, if he goes off and does speaking, if he gets coronavirus, will he die, mummy? So this is the conversations that young kids are having, because they're hearing death, destruction. We've got a politician in our country that just recently said, be prepared to lose a lot of loved ones. I mean, these are statements that I'm not sure are the healthiest statements to make in a public space, where kids go, and they hear that and they start to get panicky. So,
and we know, just off the back of that when news media articles grab that is fuel for their media machine. So they're going to start pumping that message out. This is what the leader of our country said. that
Yeah.
we need to expect to lose people. We expect to lose loved ones. And that's a pretty strong statement. Regardless of how true it is, there can be ways it can be communicated better, especially to kids, I imagine.
Yeah, and I think for children, they just hear that and that becomes their reality. And that's the challenge we've got as parents, is their reality is what we create for it. And if we don't, certainly in the early years, if we don't create the right reality for them, or we give them exposure to other worlds which become their reality, they will just assume that to be the truth. So we have to have a really strong set of values and communication tools to be able to explain to our children what's going on. So the whole idea of the brick wall is a nice one because kids understand that. You build the brick wall up, it looks after their health. If it comes down by eating the wrong things, then things can get in to attack them, etc., and maybe harm their health. So leave the children empowered. If they say, well, what can we do, Daddy? What can we do, Mummy? Create a different space for them. Create a place where they feel comfortable to talk to you in an open way. Show them there's a way through this. Show them how this is going to make the family stronger, better. We had a bit of a family chat today about we're all pulling together, and Daddy's gone off to get some food. Savannah was doing something for Mum. Liv was running around saying, oh, can I help with the dishwashing? I mean, it's just little things like this that the children feel this is an opportunity for us to come together instead of everyone just disappears to a chair where they're watching something on a phone or an iPad, etc. And look, don't get me wrong, I think that may have to happen because when children are in one space and there's not a lot for them to do, depending on how you've got your home set up, there may have to be periods where they are doing that. But if that is the norm in the house, where everybody wakes up, disappears into different parts of the house, comes back for dinner, goes back off to watch something, comes back again in the evening for dinner, if they even do that, that's not so much the pulling together. So what can you do to build those relationships? Make this an opportunity to create an even stronger bond between you and your kids. That'd be a good way to look at it.
That's fantastic. And actually, there's not much for me to add on to that because my thoughts were very similar, Ro, which was, again, to use the phrase, lock down some time in the day for your kids, your loved ones, your partner. And I was guilty of this yesterday. Genuinely, I was flicking through the Facebook feed around the 5-6 o'clock mark to get the latest information and news on what's happening so that we can ready our business. And instead of doing it, spending 20 minutes on it and stopping, I allowed that to spill over into the evening to the point where Gina, my beautiful wife, said, I thought this was our time. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, it was our time. So then I switched off the phone. So I encourage you just to lock down that time because often I was actually culprit of this role when I was growing up as in the teenage years. I would just disappear completely unconnected to the family. So I think now's a time where you're all together again to take example of what you guys are doing in the household as well. And if some people you can't access, I think rather than leverage a voice call, certainly leverage a video call, which allows you to see that person's face to face and interact via video call and say, look, everything's good. This is what we're up to. This is what we're doing. What are you up to? And I think that's powerful. In addition to that, we're tying into how to explain this to your kids. I shared a fantastic video with you yesterday, which I'll put up in the show notes, a YouTube video for teacher who puts black pepper into some water, a bowl of water, and says to the children, these spots of black pepper are the virus that's out there at the moment. So kids, does that make sense? They said yes. So they said, right, put your finger in this bowl. And of course, the pepper would stick to their finger. And so this is how the virus gets to you. Then she said, right, now coat your finger in some soap. And they said, okay, let's do that. So they coat their finger in some soap. Then they put the soapy finger into the same water with the black pepper. Brilliant. And like a science experiment, the pepper just darts away from the finger because it's like anti this soap, however that works chemically. And she said, now, kids, does that make sense on the way we can help to stop this is just simply to wash our hands. And all the kids are like, yeah, that makes sense. I want to go wash my hands now. So I think just trying to get creative with how we educate, not only ourselves as adults, because that was a big one for me. I said, okay, that is as simple and that's never going to leave me, that lesson now.
Did you send that to me on WhatsApp?
I sent that to you on WhatsApp.
Okay,
so check that out.
I saw a couple you sent yesterday. I'll have to have a look at that. That's brilliant. I want to show the kids that. That's fantastic.
And I'll put that on the show notes. And that's exactly why I sent that, because I saw your live talking about different ways we can explain this quite dramatic scenes that are going on in the world to our children in a way that is not too dark. And I thought that was cracking. So anything else you want to add on relationships before we move into the final part, which is the money?
I think just the other thing is community. So we've talked about children. The other thing is go broader now. Let's go outside of these two boundaries we talked about. Let's cross over the boundary now into the community. Who can you help? Is there somebody locally to you, somebody you've seen around for many years, or somebody that you know that is maybe more elderly, possibly physically challenged or emotionally challenged and needs some support? You know, we know of somebody just recently that lost his wife. There's people in the community that may be just in a vulnerable place. So yes, absolutely, we need to look after our family, keep them safe. If you have the capacity, if you have the emotional capacity as well as the time capacity or even financial capacity to do it, who around you could you just give some time to? Maybe somebody just needs a bit of help, or carrying some food backwards and forwards, delivering groceries, or looking after the house, making sure the house is safe. I don't know.
There's I think the fantastic lady that we both know, Ro, that I won't say her name, but she knows who she is. She's, campaigning currently because the food banks are running completely dry. Nobody's donating. Yeah. So she's saying, whoever has food, leave it on your doorstep. I will come and collect it and deliver it to the food bank, because she has that capacity. So that's an example of what you're speaking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that was the only other area I wanted to come. I mean, there's a lot we can talk about on a personal level, personal relationships, but for now, bear in mind time. I think that's a good two or three things we've covered there in relationships.
Okay, then let's talk about money as the final section.
Money. Okay. So money is, you might think of money as just being what's in your pocket, and it is, but actually the concept of money in the 5 a day and the principle of money in this whole ingredient process, this recipe for success, is money is everything from your debt, how you manage your money, how much you earn, how you allocate that money, how you manage that money when it comes into the household, your relationship with money, and this is all to do with the outside world, as well as how you cash flow forecast in your household. But then how do you earn money, and how do you create wealth? So it's everything from the debt side of money right through to the extreme other end, which is managing extreme levels of wealth or attracting more wealth into your world. So that's the philosophy of the money subject here, and it integrates with everything else. Yeah. In terms of what can we do under the current circumstances, if I tackle one first, maybe you can pick one up as well. Reviewing your finances, I think, is one of the biggest things at the moment. I hear a lot of people talking about this. I had a conversation with a gentleman that owns a cafe yesterday. He said, I think it's just suddenly hit me, the impact it's going to have on us. And I said, well, he said, we've just got to sit down. I said, well, sit down and look at your outgoings and what your incomings are. What have they been in the past? What are they in the future, do you think, with the current situation? How long do you think this is going to last? Maybe assume 4-8 weeks. How does that impact you on a business level? But it's the same thing in the family. So a few tips here is take an evening to just open up your accounts, and if you haven't got a set of accounts, open up a spreadsheet. And if you're not good with spreadsheets, just simply write down what are our main outgoings on a monthly basis. What does that equate to? That's unlikely to change massively, because although you might be staying at home, you might not be eating out as much, and although you're staying at home, you might not be spending as much money on fuel, for example. So what are your overall outgoing costs for the household? And then projecting ahead 4, 6, 8 weeks. You might want to go out to 12, but certainly 4 to 8 weeks. What is going to be your overall cost of living over that period? Now, on the basis that you might have a mortgage, you might be renting from a landlord, you might have loans out or credit cards out or any type of borrowing, they are also costs. So what you have, and you know this, Harms, because you've done this with me in the past, but you have essential costs and non-essential costs. Essential being feeding yourself, looking after the kids, keeping the house warm, for example, getting water, everything that you need to survive physically. Then you've got non-essentials, which would be things like cable TV, subscriptions, money owed to credit cards, banks, and loans, although it is important, isn't necessarily essential for you to survive. So you could separate those and say, can I reduce those temporarily? So for example, in the United Kingdom, the banks are talking about holiday periods where you don't have to pay your mortgage for a month or 2 or 3 months, but then that gets added to your mortgage in the future. So I would suggest maybe a phone call to your mortgage lender to see what their current situation is with the coronavirus situation at the moment. Is how long do they consider they're going to help you? So they might say, well, actually, we are offering a holiday period and it is 4 months and it will be added to your mortgage. If you've got a landlord, find out what the landlord's philosophy is at the moment. We are landlords, you and I, Harm, so each landlord's going to have a different approach to this. The government is trying to enforce certain things and to help both parties out, both landlords and tenants. Those rules are evolving in front of us. But maybe if you've got a relationship with your landlord, find out what their philosophy is from your landlord directly. If you've got a loan out with the bank, credit card companies, see if you can get a stay of execution, explain the situation, you're not working, you've got no income coming in for the next 2 months. Can they help you out? Can they move that commitment back a couple of months and add it on so you have some slightly higher payments in the future?
And that's where being a part of a fantastic network within your business niche is critical, because we've been sharing this. Well, you've sent a few things to me, I've sent a few things for you. I've got a group where we're proactively doing this, exactly what you're talking about, so we can preempt whatever's going to happen.
Yes. So I think that for now, from the money side, is a really important step, because remember, when there's a lack of clarity, there's often confusion, and confusion creates fear and the panic. When you've got clarity, you might say, yeah, but Ro, now I've got clarity. I know exactly how bad things are, but at least you know you can do something about it. But when you don't know, you're managing uncertainties, and uncertainties, you can't get solutions to them, because when somebody says, well, how can I help you? You go, I'm not exactly sure. But if you say, how can I help you? I need to reduce my mortgage payments by 50%. Great, let's talk to the lender. Or I need to see if I can reduce the interest rate I'm paying on that loan. Let me go talk to the bank. Would you reduce my loan for the next 6 months to help me out? But now we've got clarity. Without clarity, you can't make decisions. So clarity is power in this current marketplace.
Agree, Ro. And I think just to add to that, not to go too deep into it, because I think right now it's a case of reviewing the money systems you have in place. And again, I'll point people towards the money management series that Ro's got in the Growth Tribes Vault, which is incredible. And we'll talk about this in detail. I think one of the first things you get them to do is actually review and extract that data. So if you need some guidance with that, I would highly recommend that series. Then in addition to that, Ro, rather than a practical thing they can do, I just wanted more of a mental stimulation, and maybe something they can journal around, which is, really asking the question, did I get complacent? And this applies to every single one of us, which is we have to typically own the money situation that we have in our life. If this was to happen again, which I do believe it will, what would we do differently? What would my family do? What would I do with my money differently? Would I start to collect a war chest with a higher percentage in comparison to other things? And that will make sense when you do the money management video series, which talks about that. And I guess here it is really, Ro, is just to own the situation. As right now, I imagine there's going to be a percentage of people, a smaller percentage, who say, okay, this is great. This is one hell of a learning experience. And I can go into review mode. I can go into business forecasting mode, scenario mapping mode. But there's also going to be a percentage of people who just blame. And that's really saying, I'm just blaming coronavirus for this. I'm blaming the government for this. I'm blaming the airport authorities for this. I'm blaming this country, that president, whatever the scenario is, but blaming everybody apart from themselves, blaming the policies and the virus. I think we need to move away from that and treat this as one hell of an extreme learning curve, so that when this does happen again, and there's actually rumors, there's certain very intelligent people who are forecasting that because of these outbreaks, we are going to have to go into regular periods of isolation rather than, okay, don't worry guys, this will happen in 10 years time. It may be once or twice a year that actually we do this. So how do we hedge against that going forward? What could I do differently? So I think this is more just firing questions at the listeners that they can write down and then just explore it with their own creative minds, or tap into experts who may help provide guidance for that. So I think that's all I have to add for the money section, Ro. Is there a way we can wrap this up?
I think we've covered a huge amount here in a short space of time. And hopefully, if you're listening and you're thinking, oh my gosh, there's a lot here, go back over this, take some notes. And even if you just pick out of the 5 areas, pick maybe 3 areas you want to work on, or spread it over the period of the next few weeks. But do something. I mean, I guess chosen these because we think they're very appropriate to the current situation. If we were to talk again in 6 to 12 months' time, there'd be different messages here. But I think all of these are extremely important in the current climate where we stand at the moment. So I think to wrap it up is just get access to people with the right mindset. Try and avoid victim conversations. Try and talk to people more in a constructive way. Yes, we can't avoid it. If there's a piece of news, we're going to talk about it. What's the impact? For example, tonight in the UK, we might get an announcement, all roads closed tomorrow, or Saturday, as I'm recording this. There's going to be a reactive response to that, which is, okay, so what do we do next? But equally, don't forget that there's a bigger picture. You're looking at the top of the mountain. Which path do you want to take down the mountain? One is going to be a rocky one, talking to people in a negative way. One is going to be not necessarily less rockier, but it's a navigated path where you go twists and turns, then you go through some trees, and then you come out the other side onto a bit of a meadow, over a river. It's a bit rocky again, but at least you're going in the right direction. That's about the mindset conversations. Try and avoid victim mode. Listen to people that are in a positive mindset. So that would be, YouTube videos where there's people being constructive. You can join us on the Vault if you want to in the Growth Tribes. Learn from people that are really in that space of emotional development. Help others if you can, in whatever capacity it is. And, above all else, grow from this. Don't shrink from this. I think that's my final statement, really.
Fantastic. So I think that's a great way to sum everything up. And I think there's been some underlying themes here, which is learn, grow, and expand through times like this rather than contract. And something which you also mentioned, Ro, which is once you've handled your internal situation, your family and your own four walls, how can you help the greater community? Ask the question, with all the fear and fear-driven behavior, what is the consequence of my action right now? So when you go and take 4 items when there's only 5 left on the shelf, what is the consequence of that action? I think if we all take this approach, we can all start to behave in a sensible, rational manner as a community. So there's you there handling yourself and also them, the wider world. So I think there's an underlying theme here, which is grow. And then once you've grown, how can you help the others around you? So on that note, Ro, I think like you started the episode, which is we send our love and thoughts to your families and everybody affected by this, whether it's mildly, whether it's severe, the same love and thoughts go to everybody. And continue, I guess, to trust the information that is being staggered out there into the public domain. Stay safe, stay aware. And I guess my final message is act for yourself, but also in the interest of all the others out there as a wider community. So from a special episode, I guess, in unprecedented times, this is myself and Ro signing out. And remember, everything that we spoke about today will be on the show notes and links to each of those video series, which will help you expand and grow through these times. So myself and Ro signing out. We'll see you on the next episode.
Hello, it's Dr. Ro here. Harms and I would both like to personally thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Growth Tribes. And if you've gained just one insight, something positive that you're able to use on a personal level, on a professional level, to help your life, maybe even other people's lives, then we'd love it if you could take action on one of the following things. You can either simply subscribe so you don't miss out on any other great insights coming up in the future. You can share this podcast with close friends so they can also get the benefits of the tips and tools that we're sharing. Or it would be amazing if you could give us a review and let others know just how great this episode was. And finally, if you do have a question, don't forget to submit it on growthtribes.com/podcast. Thank you again for listening. This is Dr. Rowan Harms signing out, and we'll see you again on the next podcast.